He remained door closed. Says he was going inside the house. He just shut the door, heard a shot and scream, and another shot. And Crawford did run back outside, pulled the driver's door open, and called 911. After the interview ended, Crawford was free to go. A polygraph was done. For those of you who don't know, in Alabama, a polygraph test is admissible in court. So it's one of the few states where polygraphs are admissible. But about a week later, Crawford was brought back for more questioning and agreed to take a polygraph test. And his reactions were off the chain. The examiner explained. But again, the interview ended without an arrest. Now it's time for the autopsy results. The backlogs of Welcome back to episode 5 of season 4 of the True Crime Lounge podcast. This episode is set to come out June 4th. If you are a Patreon member, this episode is already out. I do have a merch shop that you can go check out as well. For any updates on my channel or podcast, you can find me on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Now, with that being said, why don't we dive into today's episode, shall we? Today, for episode 5, we're going to be talking about a case I have been looking forward to talking about since I decided to do this theme for Alabama murders, and since it really happened, since I found out about it. But for this case, we're going to have to go to Coleman, Alabama, and this is the kind of town where you hear something happening like this once and you never hear about it again. I knew that once the sentencing was over that I had to talk about this case. Now, before I jump into this case, please know there are still young children who have already lost a mom and they have a dad in prison. So please remember to practice kindness and sensitivity. And I will do my best to be as unbiased as possible for this case. I'm gonna go ahead and get these out of the way. I do believe that she could not have shot herself twice with her non-dominant hand. I also believe that the police would I also have a very hard understanding of why police would hand the van back over to the family, which was enough time to clean any evidence. And they say it was to protect the children, but they should have took the van for evidence. There were so many errors that happened early on in this case that we need to really understand. But with that being said, I'm going to try to be as unbiased as possible now that I have got those out of the way. But anyway, this case even about 48 hours to do an episode on it, which I will link in the description. Now, I live in Coleman, Alabama. At the time of this case happening, for those of you who don't know where Coleman is, it is between Huntsville and Birmingham, Alabama. For the sake of this episode, like I said, I will do my best to be as unbiased as possible. And also, please just remember there are children still alive who theoretically technically have lost both parents, honestly. But on May 2nd, 2017, Jason Crawford discovered his wife, Tiffany Crawford, slumped in the driver's seat of her own van outside the family home. He will go on to say, "My wife was shot," as to 911 dispatcher. When Coleman County Sheriff's deputies arrived at the scene, they found Tiffany with a pink revolver in her left hand, which Jason said that she kept in the driver's side of her door for protection. I'm not disputing that. I'm not. Because I do believe that women do need to have a form of protection on them. But body camera footage showed that the sheriff's deputies saw tonight at the scene which one of the deputies approached the van and checked Tiffany's wrist for a pulse. Her pink revolver fell out of her hand. And here's the thing, let's keep in mind. Tiffany was right-handed. So make it make sense here. They asked what happened that night, and Crawford explained to the deputies that he and Tiffany had been arguing. He said that he wasn't going to let her inside the house, so he was gathering some of her clothes. And the last thing he remembers was that she said she loved him and he was going inside the house. And he heard a shot, a scream, and then another shot. Tiffany had two gunshot wounds to her head, one shot to the left side of her jaw, and the other to her left temple. At least one sheriff's deputy at the scene believed she was taking her own life. The paramedics tried to revive her, but it was too late. And they came over and told him that she was dead. And it just made him sick to his stomach. So how did Tiffany and Jason meet exactly? Well, it was an unusual start to say the least. Before her death, and Jason had been married before for more than 6 years. But when they first started dating, it wasn't exactly a fairy tale. Um, Crawford had already been divorced for several years, and his first wife said his first wife cheated on him. Tiffany was also married at the time, but that didn't change the way Crawford felt about her. He also thought she was striking and beautiful, she was outgoing, and a lot of things. And eventually, Tiffany got divorced. They would create a new family. In 2011, Jason and Tiffany would get married, and she would become a stepmom to his son Logan from a previous marriage. And they would have a son of their own shortly afterward, and then a daughter that following year. She was very active in their lives. She was even involved with she was very involved with her children and seeing how happy they were. Her mom would tell 48 hours. So when her mom learned about her daughter's death, she said that she felt like she was kind of frozen in time. And since Tiffany's passing, life hasn't been the same without her. Tiffany was an individual that had a huge heart and she just wanted to engulf everyone around her and help them find joy. She was also created Mothers Helping Mothers on Facebook. Um, and this was her way of support, and this was a support group that, like, with moms having depression and stuff after giving birth. And that she had a vision that us moms could talk to someone, and the group took off like wildfire and spread out over the country. At the time of her death, the group had about 9,000 members. Now, on the night of the shooting, Tiffany's 5-year-old son and 4-year-old daughter were both asleep inside the house. Crawford said his then 14-year-old son Logan was also in the house, and that Logan told his grandparents to get there quickly. Once Jason's parents arrived, the deputies at the scene realized that Jason was the son of Wanda Crawford, and who was the office manager at the Coleman County Sheriff's Office. So, because of the incident involving one of the employee's close relatives, the Coleman County Sheriff, Matt Gentry, visited the Crawford scene that night. And once he arrived, he spoke to the coroner, and the coroner determined that Tiffany's death appeared to be a suicide. He said the weird thing is that there's two shots. Gentry decided that because of Jason's mom's connection to the office, he wanted an autopsy done. A smart move on his part, right? Um, Joe Parrish would take over the Crawford case. After the ABI gets involved, the sheriff investigators finished their scene processing the scene that night, and they decided to turn the van back over to the turn the scene over to the Alabama State Bureau of Investigation. Now, here's the following morning. Joe Parrish was Pritchard was the state agent assigned to the case. And Gentry will go and say he could have told his guys to work on it, but he did not. He wanted, out of fear for a potential conflict of interest because of his mom's connection to office, he wanted full transparency. Let's talk about the van for a minute. The first thing that Parrish did was obtain a search warrant for Tiffany's Crawford van. But there was one problem. The sheriff's office released the van to the Crawford family the night before, and by the time Parrish got to it, less than 24 hours Tiffany died, it had already been cleaned by the family members. They said they had received permission from the sheriff's office. This was nothing of evidentiary value to the van. The entry would tell 48 hours. Every bit would come was needed was taken. So when Parrish began looking into the Crawford case, he quickly learned that Tiffany had been having an affair with another man. Nothing suicidal about that. Uh, Lindsay Lindsay Luke was a close friend of Tiffany's and one of the few people who knew about the affair. Luke and Tiffany told her that she was making plans to leave Jason and that she had gotten a job at a local grocery store to pay money for money for a new life. And Luke also had never believed that Tiffany would take her own life. Suicidal people don't make plans. Luke told 48 Hours there was nothing suicidal about her. Here comes the 911 call. So, when Joe Parrish reviewed the body camera footage in the 911 call, he never heard Crawford mention the affair. He also thought something was off about the 911 call, and he felt it was very cold. He didn't sound like somebody who was worried about his wife. Now, obviously, your wife just there was a shooting, so you think you would be a little bit more concerned. This brings us to Jason's first interview. A week after she died, an autopsy was still pending. Parrish brought Jason in for questioning, and during that interview, Crawford said that months leading up to her death, he noticed a change. She started drinking more. And Crawford also confirmed that she was right-handed, which was a key information for Parrish that was given that the gun was found in her left hand. So, what about finding out about the affair? Well, during the interview, Crawford also shared that on the day of Tiffany's death, he discovered messages on their computer that she was having an affair. Um, and he said that he called Tiffany to confront her, and when he did, he found that, but he said she denied it. After a few hours, Tiffany came home with the two kids. Crawford brought them inside and told Tiffany to stay outside. Now, according to Jason's account, he explained to Parrish that he and Tiffany argued for more than an hour, and when he remained insistent that Tiffany wasn't allowed inside the house. He said that she asked him to get her work clothes. Um, when he remained work clothes, says he was going inside the house. He just shut the door, heard a shot, and scream, and another shot. And Crawford did run back outside, pulled the driver's door, opened and called 911. After the interview ended, Crawford was free to go. A polygraph was done. For those of you who don't know, in Alabama, a polygraph test is admissible in court. So it's one of the few states where polygraphs are admissible. But about a week later, Crawford was brought back for more questioning and agreed to take a polygraph test. And his reactions were off the chain. The examiner explained. But again, the interview ended without an arrest. Now it's time for the autopsy results. The backlogs of the state ballistic labs would delay Tiffany Crawford autopsy results for a year. But when the report came back in March 2018, the case was ruled a homicide, and Dr. Valerie Green, medical examiner, performed an autopsy. And the thing is that made her think there could be something else going on was the case that gunshot wound on the left side of her head. So, what was her analysis? She explained that based on the absence of gunpowder particles and abrasions around the left temple wound, and concluded that the shot was fired from at least 10 inches away. That indicating that she had an arm outward beyond 10 inches and herself. And Dr. Green said that, and she did believe That is unlikely, especially because the Jasons reported that he found Tiffany in the driver's seat of her van with a gun in her left hand. Let's not to mention the absence of blood on the driver's side door. Um, and there was something else that concerned Dr. Green about the van. Looking at the pictures of the side door, and there isn't any blood. She didn't see any blood on the glass screen. And she didn't think that the door is open because he was standing there. So, this leads to Jason Crawford surrendering. With a homicide ruling from the medical examiner, investigator Joe Parrish and Jeff Roberts, the Coleman County Assistant DA, at the time, took the case to a grand jury. The jury came back with indictment in the murder against for the murder against Jason Crawford. On May 24th, 2018, just a year after her death, he surrendered at the Coleman County Sheriff's Office, but he was only in custody for 30 minutes before he was released on bond. So, let's talk about his defense team. Robert Hutton and Nicholas Weatherly became his defense attorneys. And they would say, we don't believe Jason is guilty. And that they did not see any blood or anything on him. And they found something that would indicate he had a firearm recently. But Crawford never tested for gunshot residue. And on the night of the shooting, in his house was never searched for bloody clothing. And his attorneys also believe that Crawford was inside the house when the shots rung, especially because his oldest son Logan told investigators that he heard his father come back inside before the first gunshot. Only one person had a motive. Jeff Roberts and his assistant Deborah Ball were confident in their case, and they couldn't figure out who else did it. He was the only one who had motive to do it. And Roberts did acknowledge that it would be tough to overcome the fact that there was at least one officer in the scene who thought the shooting was consistent with a suicide. And there was no direct physical evidence linked Jason and Tiffany's death. His trial will begin. And see, I was a paralegal at a law firm at the time, so I didn't go to this trial because I was at work. But I really wanted to, but we had one of the attorneys who went who told us like what some of the stuff that was going on. I was reading a newspaper article, and I was like, wow. It did not really do him any good to get up there and testify. I do believe, here's my thing, I do believe, if he would have just kept his mouth shut, he could have possibly got a hung jury, but he opened his mouth. Anyway, in November 22, more than 5 years after Tiffany's death, Crawford, went on trial for her murder. And the prosecution played a 911 call for the jury and showed them their footage, and Jeff Roberts argued that he believed Crawford's alleged motive anger over his wife's affair. One of Tiffany's friends testified after learning that Tiffany had been cheating. Jason called her and told her that he couldn't go through this again. Remember, keep in mind, he said that his first wife had also had an affair. The prosecution called on the DNA expert, Angela Fletcher, who examined the swabs taken from Tiffany's gun, and she testified there was only a trace amount of DNA detected, and that she couldn't say for sure the female DNA, any female DNA on it. She was also certain, though, that there was a tighter grip containing the male DNA, but she couldn't confirm the DNA belonged to Crawford. The profile was so limited that she was unable to do any type of comparison. So her testimony will go with little DNA detected in the gun. They argued that Crawford must have wiped the gun and planted it in Tiffany's hand. The defense said that there was no proof of this, but perhaps damaging testimony against Crawford came from a medical examiner. I believe, based on what I read, it was his testimony that damaged him. But anyway, trying to be as unbiased as possible. But she told the jury how she believed the gunshot wound to Tiffany's temple was fired from more than 10 inches away. Now it's time for the defense to present its case. The defense showed a pre-recorded deposition from a former chief medical of Alabama, Dr. James Larson. He believed that Mr. Crawford shot herself first, Mr. Crawford shot herself first on the side of the face and then shot herself twice, herself again in the left side of her head. He also testified there was no way to know for sure temple because it was fired because of her hair. Let's talk about Tiffany's emotional state now. The defense also argued that Tiffany was struggling emotionally and started seeing a counselor just one day before she died. Tiffany's friends also testified that she had been drinking excessively and that she was upset because the man she had an affair with had recently broken up with her. Let's move on to her journal. Tiffany's journal was entered into evidence and portions of it was read out to the jury. The entry, May 2nd, 2017, the day she died, like, I'm struggling figuring out what to do with myself. This is when Jason Crawford will take the stand. Composing myself. So on the last day of the trial, he took the stand. He told the jury that he loved Tiffany and denied killing her. He also testified that testified that he called Tiffany a degrading name the night she died, and he was basically walking down her like she wasn't human. And he feels sorry because he felt like that he contributed to what pushed her over the edge. So, after 4 days of testimony, the case went to the jury. Megan Brock was one of the jurors, and she said that the jury went to the deliberation room. Several jurors were on the fence about his guilt. Megan Brock said that the jury deliberated for several hours before they asked to listen to the 911 call again. And the operator kept asking him who shot her, and 911 operator didn't question her and the jury. So 30 minutes later, after the jury listened to the 911 call, they went back to the courtroom and delivered their verdict. They found him guilty of his wife's murder. So in March 10th, 2023, he stood there before a judge again when his lawyers pleaded his innocence, and the judge would then sentence him to 99 years in prison. And under Alabama law, he will be eligible for parole in 15 years. Yeah. Now, her legacy. Her mom, Cheryl, would make sure the grandchildren are proud of their mom and that they never forget who she is. And she would go and say she's just an angel that came down from heaven in a short time. Um, Now, I want to say my opinion of the case is that he set himself up when he took the stand. I know that the defendants have a right to take the stand, but however, he could have gotten a hung jury if he would have kept his mouth shut. And my question is that why did they not take the van into evidence? Why did they release the van back to the family? Did Sheriff Matt Gentry do the right thing by handing over to the ASBI? He still should have took the van in to be processed for evidence, and I'm glad her case got justice. So many women don't get that justice. But that is it for today's episode. I will see y'all next time. Y'all have a great day.